everyone. Hello, I'm Bob Edwards. I'm the author of Mallory, Irvine, and Everest, The Last Step at One, published by Pen and Sword in 2024. The subject of this presentation is the last climb of George Mallory and Andrew Irvine on June 8, 1924, on the north face of Mount Everest. I am a mathematician and not a mountaineer, so my approach in this book and in this presentation is necessarily analytical and quantitative, and is based primarily on contemporary accounts. To my mind, in the story of Mallory and Irvine, the central mystery is whether one of them, on June the 8th, 1924, was the first person to stand at the highest point in the world. At the time, since they did not return, there was no way to know for sure. Some of their colleagues thought they had done so, others thought not. In the years that followed, there developed something of an official narrative to the effect that they had failed. But if they reached the summit of Everest, they did so 29 years before the ascent by Hillary and Tenzing. My presentation is in 4 parts. The first is what we know, by which I mean our knowledge based on contemporary accounts, setting aside modern opinion, speculation, and hearsay. The second is what we do not know, in which I will be brief since there are too many unknowns to address in this presentation. The third is hypotheses of the climb, in which I will again briefly outline some of the hypotheses that I presented in my book and for which I think there is substantive evidence. The fourth is Irvine's journey, in which I relate my ideas as to when and where Irvine's remains fell to the glacier. Here I make a disclaimer that this is a work in progress. In this narration, in order to save time, I will generally use imperial units, which are the units used in most of the source documents. The images include the equivalent metric units. The first part, then, is what we know, in terms of facts, data, and documentation. Here, as I mentioned earlier, I have relied primarily on contemporary accounts. These include the official account of the 1924 expedition, authored primarily by Colonel Edward Norton, the personal accounts of some of the expedition members, notably John Noel and Noel Odell, the film The Epic of Everest, shot and narrated by John Noel, and the letters and diaries of Mallory and Irvine, by courtesy respectively of Magdalen College, Cambridge, and Merton College, Oxford. We know from Odell's famous photograph that Mallory and Irvine left Camp 4 at 23,000 feet on the North Col on the morning of June 6, 1924. We can see that they personally carried at least 1 oxygen bottle each. They may have carried more. They were accompanied by 12 porters, some of whom carried oxygen. The number of bottles is unknown. It was an easy climb to Camp 5 at 25,300 feet. Odell's photograph is often represented as the last image of Mallory and Irvine alive. It is not. On June 7th, at an unknown time, John Noel captured them on film, accompanied by at least 2 porters. They were ascending above Camp 5 on the North Ridge. Noel was on another mountain several miles away, namely Changtse. From his vantage point, the climbing party was silhouetted against a bank of cloud. After that, as far as we know, he never saw them again. We know that Mallory sent 2 notes from his high camp, one for John Noel and one for Noel Odell. My takeaways are as follows. Mallory planned on an early start on June 8th, but we do not know what he meant by early. Mallory expected that Noel would be able to see him by telephoto at 8 a.m., although, bizarrely, he wrote 8 p.m. Mallory expected to be, at that hour, on or just below the summit pyramid. Mallory wanted Odell to leave Camp 5 vacant on June 8th, so he did not plan to stay at Camp 6 on the return. We know that Odell, on June the 8th at 12:50, saw, or believed he saw, Mallory and Irvine briefly through a clearing in the clouds. His first descriptions referred to their surmounting a rock step on the ridge. In one of these descriptions, he referred to the place as the last step but one. In October 1925, he collaborated with an artist for the Sphere magazine. The artist's impression showed Odell holding binoculars. The artist's impression depicts the place as similar to the third step, which at that time had no name. Over time, Odell qualified his early descriptions and privately referred to the place as the second step. Sometime in the 1980s, Odell drew a map of his climbs of those 2 days. The map is not consistent with the times that he reported in June 1924. We know that in 1933, Percy Wynne Harris found an ice axe on the north face, on smooth slabs inclined at about 30 degrees. The altitude was about 27,700 feet. Only Mallory or Irvine could have dropped or placed the axe there. The axe has various notches or cuts. In his memoirs in the 1980s, Sir Percy wrote that his own porter had made those marks. I believe, given the smooth and steep slabs where the axe was found, that it was placed and not dropped there. I saw the axe at the Alpine Club in London. It is 37.5 inches long. At Shrewsbury School in England, there is an ice axe which belonged to Irvine. It is 43.5 inches long. I believe the axe from 1933 was originally issued to a porter and was not a personal axe of either Mallory or Irvine. We know that on May 17, 1999, Tapley Richards found an oxygen cylinder bearing the number 9 near the first step. Only Mallory or Irvine could have placed it there. On Mallory's body, an envelope was found bearing a list apparently of 6 oxygen cylinders. One of them appeared to be number 9. Later, Jake Norton reported that the cylinder had contained oxygen. The quantity was never determined. The present location of the bottle is unknown. To this day, we do not know whether the cylinder was placed during an ascent, a descent, or even as part of a caching prior to the climb. We know that on May 1st, 1999, Conrad Anker found Mallory's body. Mallory was about 1,200 yards from the summit and over 2,000 feet below. Mallory's leg was broken, and he had a deep wound above his right eye. His gloves and mittens were missing. Both his hands were frostbitten. His goggles were in a pocket, so he had died after sunset. There was no sign of oxygen apparatus, an ice axe, a torch, or a lantern. His altimeter was broken. His watch, found later, had run down. In short, the discovery told nothing about when he had died. Mallory had a rope around his body and discolorations on his torso. The climbers cut the rope. It remains unknown whether Mallory had been roped to Irvine or even accompanied by Irvine when he died. We know that in September 2024, Erik Rupke found a boot on the central Rongbuk Glacier. The head of the glacier is at about 21,000 feet, that is, about 7,000 feet below where Mallory and Irvine were last seen alive. The boot contained a sock with the label AC Irvine and a human foot. The team handed over the findings to the China-Tibet Mountaineering Association. Nothing more has been disclosed about the place of discovery, the condition of the findings, or what the Chinese authorities plan to do with them. From the single published image we can see that the discovery was in a narrow canyon with a floor of moraine, bounded on both sides by ice walls. At one end of the canyon there is blue sky. At the other end there is a series of ridges, but no sign of Everest or any identifiable mountain. 12. The second section of my presentation, which will be extremely brief, is what we do not know. As Don Juan Matus said to Carlos Castaneda, if what we know is the island of the Tonal, what we do not know is the Nagual, which is essentially everything else. In this presentation, we don't have time to cover in any detail what we do not know. So I have attempted to summarize it in one slide as follows. Where was Mallory's and Irvine's high camp? Did Odell know where their high camp was? What time did they leave their camp? What were they carrying? What was their plan? Where was Odell when he saw Mallory and Irvine, and where were they? And how did they get there? What was Mallory's and Irvine's route after Odell's sighting? How did Mallory end up where his body was found? Where on the glacier was Irvine's boot, and how did it get there? What roles did the ice axe and cylinder number 9 play in the story? To do justice to any of these unknowns would, I think, take more time than we have today.